Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. And welcome to an episode of Take the Mic. Take the Mic is an initiative of Mama Rising to hand this platform and this microphone over to one of our amazing Mama Rising coaches and facilitators around the world to give her a chance to share her story of matrescence and motherhood, the stories of the mothers in her community, so we can all hear each other's stories, heal together, and change the way the whole world acknowledges matrescence and motherhood. So here is one of our coaches.
To acknowledge that I live, mother, and work on Bunurong land where sovereignty has never been ceded. I acknowledge the colonial trauma experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, birth givers, mothers, and families, and I recognise their resilience. I'd like to give a heads up that there's some sensitive content ahead, where I'll be mentioning how complex trauma intersects with matrescence. And this may include mentions of childhood sexual assault, domestic violence, complex PTSD, and other mental health experiences. However, the focus of this episode is on resilience. So please be gentle on yourself as you listen, or save it for another time if that's best for you. So my name is Dusk. My pronouns are she, her, and I live with my daughter and partner on Bunurong land in Melbourne's west. I come from a lineage of women who lived their lives with strength, love, and joy. My grandmother migrated here from Holland and then had my mother, and my dad migrated here when he turned 18 from New Zealand. Weaved throughout their stories and my own is the thread of intergenerational trauma and intergenerational resilience. As I share today, I'm sharing from my perspective as a survivor and as a perinatal trauma-aware care educator and support professional. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share about my experience of becoming a mother and how this has shaped my work. So I was 35 years old when I got pregnant with 7 years of counselling under my belt. And in this time, I had attended to the complex PTSD that I carried from my childhood sexual assault and the layers of trauma that surrounded that. In that time, I had processed so much of my experience. I had learned how to self-regulate, and I had built an incredible resource kit of tools to move through life with. But what I didn't know was that I had grounded it all in my identity as a woman. And then I became a mother. I carried an awareness of how being a survivor might influence my experience of pregnancy and birth. And in response, I actually scaffolded myself with so much support to allow me to be present to all that could bring. But when it came to birthing myself as a mother, I didn't extend any of that compassion and resourcing and support to my emerging self. Looking back now, I can see that I believed that when I crossed into that threshold of motherhood, I wasn't allowing myself to carry the impact of my childhood trauma with me. I felt like I had to leave it in the birth suite with the blood-stained sheets and that I would be rolled to the postnatal ward as a new creation. I only allowed the woman part of me to be impacted by my childhood and to be supported in response. But the mother part, She really was completely on her own. And yet, somehow, the consequences of my trauma, my anxiety, intrusive thoughts, insomnia, and panic attacks, they didn't get that message. And so they came home with me from the hospital, wrapped in a blanket deep within me. There were so many challenges that I faced in my early postpartum and my first few years of motherhood: hypervigilance, postpartum OCD, navigating the DV landscape of extended family relationships, and moving with the grief of losing my mother to cancer when my bub was 7 months old. So it was a lot. But what was underlying all of this was the unique inner splits that I was experiencing as a survivor of sexual assault and as a mother. So, as well as navigating the pull between the woman I was and the mother I was becoming, my experience of complex trauma unearthed new inner splits that were then brought on by motherhood. So, I experienced the inner split of survivor to protector. I experienced the inner split of the dutiful daughter to the cycle breaking mother. And I experienced the inner split of self regulator to the co regulator of my childhood. Prior to having my daughter, I had built a life with space to tend to my trauma responses, to settle my nervous system amongst the many triggers that life brings, and to maintain the peace with my family through distance. And then motherhood just split this resource in two, and all of a sudden I was pulled in more directions than ever before. So I now not only needed to protect myself, but this tiny little human who was so vulnerable and so dependent on me. I needed to hold new boundaries with my family that wouldn't continue the cycle of dysfunction that I had grown up in. And all of this deep work was even more dysregulating than just moving through the world. And when I reached for the self-soothing tools to settle my nervous system, my daughter would need me, and I'd be torn between regulating myself or co-regulating her. So as much as I wanted to separate out the woman I was as a survivor and the new mother that I wanted to be, my experience of motherhood was shaped by my experience of as a survivor. And all of this swirled within me. So as I looked around me, there were no conversations happening that reflected this experience. So I just held it in until I saw it for what it was. So 3 years after becoming a mother, I came across the word matrescence, the transition into and through motherhood, and it led me to train as a Mama Rising coach. And I clearly remember a few weeks into my training when we were looking at the concept of the good mother, the often unspoken but deeply embedded assumptions about what a good mother is and does. And the question that was asked of me completely unraveled me. We were given a journal prompt, and it was simply, what were and still are your expectations of being a good mother? And I wrote this in my journal. What comes to me is the good mother doesn't experience trauma or grief. And if unforeseen things happen, she needs to put it aside for the sake of the children. And there it was, the unconscious belief that had been keeping apart the woman and the mother in me. Here was the reason that I was withholding compassion and resourcing and support to myself as a mother. There had been so many times that I had not acknowledged and tended to the impact of my trauma in my motherhood because I believed that I couldn't be a good mother if I did. And when I named that, I could feel my maternal lineage and all the ways the women before me had buried their trauma rather than tending to it, wrapping it in a blanket deep within them. And I had followed in their footsteps for 3 years until that moment. And in that moment, I was able to start nurturing the inner split between the woman and the mother in me. So I invited in the woman, the survivor, who had created a life of resilience in the face of my trauma. And she met the mother in me who was longing for the same compassion, resourcing, and support that I lavished onto my child. And I created a new definition of a good enough mother, one that honored all of me, the survivor and the mother, where I am invited to show up in my tenderness and my resilience, mothering myself and my daughter, and moving with the layers of intergenerational trauma and breaking the cycles that are mine to break. So looking back, if I could go into that newborn mother, me in the birth suite, I would just embrace her and I would honor who she was as a survivor and the incredible strength, love, and joy that she moves through the world with. I would invite her not to leave that woman behind, but to hold hands with the mother she was becoming, creating a life of resilient mothering. And my hope from this embrace would be that as survivors, we can acknowledge our unique experience of matrescence and live into our resilience, owning all parts of ourselves, survivor and mother. And that is the work that I am now doing with mothers and parents and families across the world. And what that looks like is really taking my experience and centering trauma sensitive maternal care that honours our resilience. And I do this through peer support, doula support, and education. So for peer support, I have created an online platform called Dear Dusk, and it is like an agony aunt style column, kind of like a grown-up Dolly Doctor for survivors navigating motherhood. And it's a space that I longed for when I became a mother, where I could ask questions around like whatever I was experiencing and see my experience reflected back to me and by those around me so that I could feel less alone in it all. So it's a space to talk about conception, infertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, matrescence, everything that this motherhood, parenthood journey stirs in those of us who are navigating it with our unique challenges. For doula support, I am a pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and matrescence support professional, especially for survivors of sexual assault and people with complex trauma. And I companion people through these significant transitions, sitting with them in their struggle, supporting them as they find their agency, and defining parenthood on their own terms. And I absolutely love it. It's a real honor to sit with people in all of the shadow and light that that this transition brings. And then for education, I provide trauma-aware perinatal and maternal care education to health professionals and maternal care workers. And we explore everything, the principles, practices, and benefits of resilience-oriented care and how to bring that awareness into our everyday practice. So from all of that, my hope or my vision for the future is that we can create a culture of trauma-sensitive maternal care together, one that understands the unique experience of parenthood as a survivor and a perinatal healthcare system that is resilience-oriented and trauma-sensitive so that we can all thrive. So this has been a big conversation, and I'm so thankful to you for being present to it. Before this little episode ends, I just want to invite you to take a moment just to come back to yourself. If you want to take a deep breath or look around you, check in with your body, whatever feels resonant in this moment, just to return to yourself. And if you would like to connect or write me a letter at Dear Dusk, you can find more details in the show notes, as well as some support services if this episode has brought anything up for you. So thank you so much for listening and being part of this vision to build a culture of trauma-sensitive maternal care together. I hope you have a beautiful day.